I want to do a very brief review of the Fuji X-T3 now that I've had the camera now for 6 weeks. First of all, I'm using the 16mm f 1.4 lens at 1.4. ISO's auto, and it's at 1/48 of a second. I'm filming at 1080p, 23.98 frames per second. It's probably, that blue period, transitioning itself to blue period from this golden period. Be interesting to see in the video how this transitions. For the ISO, it's an auto. And as you know, if you have an X-T2, the transitions in terms of auto ISO for auto exposure tends to look a little weird. And I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that weird kind of like stepping look. But then again, I haven't been in several situations. And hopefully, as the months go on, I'll see if there is a weird transitioning in exposure. Like right now, there's a lot more light, and now the camera is probably doing a better job lowering the ISO, utilizing the aperture a lot more. Well, it's at 1.4. Okay, let's talk about the camera. I'm really liking the continuous autofocus with face detection. I think that's like the number one takeaway from this video. It's really consistent. Did I say it was 16mm f1.4? I think I did. It's right now it's in continuous autofocusing with face detection, and I've done several of these so far, and it hasn't disappointed me at all. Cars go by, the lighting changes, exposure changes, and it's pretty rock solid. And that has a lot to do with its 4th generation quad-core processor with its BSI 26.1 megapixel sensor, hybrid sensor, which has a lot of what they call phase detection points, which allows the camera to focus faster. And there's a wonderful history about contrast-based points and hybrid and phase detection points, and how they work together to create a seamless system. So touchscreen, I'm not utilizing at all. It's still it's a little weird, just like the XH1. I don't think it's ready for prime time. Definitely something like the Canon SL2 has a way better touch and feel on that. In terms of if you've never had an XT body, you'll find very quickly that it's pretty tiny and sort of discreet. I would say the X100F is probably the most discreet camera, even compared to the XT3. But the X-T3 is a bit of a discreet camera if you especially put something like a 23mm f2 lens. Talking about lenses, the 16mm f1.4, the 23mm f1.4, or the f2 work great in stills and video. They're wonderful lenses. The 56mm f1.2 lens is a different story. Doing video on that lens is pretty tough, depending on the exposure, and also taking pictures. Sometimes it really struggles a little bit when the subject is really close by, but when the exposure is right and things are working, the 56 or the X-T3 with the 56mm f1.2 lens nails it. It's really nice, the pictures. I'll have a video on 2 situations that I took pictures at night, and it turned out alright. I was really surprised. better than my better performance of the 56F 1.2 on my X-T3 than my XH1. I did buy a grip for it, a hand grip, not a battery grip. The hand grip I think is really important for me because it's a little, going back to the body again, it's compact, but I noticed that I can't seem to get a grip with 3 fingers. Sometimes I'll put a what do they call that, a wristband on it, and then try to like hold the camera, but it's really hard to grip it with all my fingers. Sometimes I use 3 fingers. Without the grip, it's really hard to do. As a matter of fact, I think if you have something like a 23mm f2 lens, you can easily put in a lanyard to carry your camera that way. But the grip gives me that ability. The grip, though, when you put it on, it makes the camera feel more solid and more heavy. Definitely, if you're using a long lens, it's going to be very challenging. But again, before you buy, try it out, see if you like it. Definitely, it's not like an XH1 where it has a DSLR feel. It has other features that this camera doesn't, where a lot of people complain that it doesn't have image stabilization, which it would be nice if it did, but in reality, I think if you're doing video and specifically face detection type video where you need face detection, this camera is going to be the one that you're going to choose for the moment. Of course, the XH2 is going to come out probably in maybe in 2021, early 2021, because the XH1 is really pretty new. It's less than a year old, and it still needs, of course, a lot of firmware updates to make that camera to move up to its potential. The X-T3 is the camera, probably, I would hopefully would say, is the flagship camera because the X-T3 is probably going to be it's a seminal moment for Fuji creating the X-T3. No other X camera can really compare to this camera. Sure, IBIS is important, and the XH1, is something really important. But really, what do you want more? IBIS or better focus? Yeah, I think better focus is probably the best answer. Sure, not everybody utilizes these cameras for video, and 2-3 years ago, you watch any video and people would be like, be quiet already about these cameras being video cameras. And it's true. Most of the X cameras out there don't have too much phase detection points, which is something that this camera has from edge to edge. It allows the camera to create beautiful focus to, I dare say, very close to something like a dual pixel for Canon's dual pixel technology. We won't know until the camera is more refined. This is the exciting thing, that within 2 years, Fuji will develop firmware for this camera that will probably be making the camera much better. Like, for example, you can't use the camera now to track objects like the Sony camera, or I think the Canon camera, where in the back screen you tell the camera, look, focus on this and just track it. It doesn't do that yet, but I'm pretty sure it will in the future. The camera gives you two types of codecs, which is pretty neat. H.265, which is 10-bit, and H.264. The H.265 is being utilized right now. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the camera, pushes the exposure. In this situation, I'm easily more than 1600. I've seen the camera, I have a video that the camera went up to 10,000, and it wasn't that great, but at least it was usable and it was focusing. There is compression, two types of compression. One where it keeps all the frames, which is all I, and another setting where it compares frames and takes out data. Right now I'm using the former, so it gives me more data. Is that better? I don't know. Is it going to give me a better picture? Maybe. But the cool thing is that it gives you those options. I haven't used zebras, but for the moments that I have used it, it's really useful, really nice. I hope false color will one day be on one of these cameras. In terms of it having everything that you really need to make a movie is pretty neat, because it has audio out and it has audio in. You don't need the grip anymore to do an additional boost. The camera, if you're filming in 4K, specifically in 60p, the batteries will run out kind of quick. I would say less than 40 minutes. It does get warm. It doesn't get hot, but it does get warm. And if the camera is directly, if the sun's hitting it, of course it's gonna get warmer. The camera has not turned off because it overheats. It hasn't done that at all, which I'm really glad that it hasn't. Yes, these small batteries are an issue, but of course the camera is compact, so you have to there has to be a certain expectation. The screen is really nice in the back, so is the electronic viewfinder. I think the electronic viewfinder is one of the key things that makes these Fuji cameras awesome. I think the X-T1 is a good example of that. Right now we are now in blue period, getting into more darker situation, and definitely the street lights, freeway lights are going to take to effect. So you definitely could look at the range in which the camera is really trying to push the exposure, and it's at +1 exposure compensation, so that's going to be very interesting to watch. I think that's it for now. Definitely it gives you an idea of what 16mm f1.2 looks like in 1080p at 23.98 frames per second. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye bye.